A day after presenting a budget with many firsts, Union Finance Minister Mr. Arun Jaitley speaking to us here live on Times Now. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Jaitley. How difficult was it for you to come up with a budget, a prescription for India in a period of demonetization, post-demonetization, where there has been an impact on growth?
Well, I think the objects were clear. And once the objects were clear, it's not very difficult to put all the pieces in place. The first criteria was that we had to spend more. Demonetization will enable us to collect more because eventually in the long run, the size of the formal economy is going to increase. Monies which were operating in the system almost without an ownership, without an identification, have now been identified, they've gone into the banking system. Not only is there going to be additional tax revenue on that money, but the future transactions also are going to lead to growth both in indirect and direct taxes. I've been modest in my next year's estimate of overall tax buoyancy because I'd rather be safe and cautious rather than be below the target. Last 2 years, I've had a revenue growth of 17% each, which is quite unprecedented in India. And I think in future, it's going to be a significant growth. Therefore, I had to spend more. I had to spend more on rural India. I had to spend more on the farmers. I had to spend more on infrastructure in the social sectors. You had to maintain the defense expenditure. And once you are clear and you spend more, essentially on areas where spending is possible, which has been tested and tried, and which are some kind of either success stories or absolute developmental imperatives. So we spent on those areas, and that's why we were talking straight as far as that expenditure in the budget is concerned. On taxation, we had to continue our policy of going hard against black money, enlarging the tax base. At the same time, we saw virtues in giving concession to certain category of people. The MSMEs are huge job creators. So I had to identify a section by which whose tax rate had to be brought down as a part of this incentivization. Plus, as far as the small taxpayer is concerned, there are distinct advantages. A, he's been burdened by inflation. B, he's been a compliant taxpayer. And C, by making his rate very reasonable, 5%, I had to incentivize the non-filers to start filing. Because if for paying a very negligible or a small amount of tax, you can get into the tax net, you can sleep well, you can create capital, that incentivization was required. So this was both an economic necessity as also, I think it was the right thing to do. You reward the honest taxpayer and you have a carrot and stick policy as regard the non-compliant is concerned so that he becomes compliant.
Mr. Jaitley, many would say that the middle classes expected more from you, and that's also your vote bank. Also, corporate India expected a bigger sweetener this year because given the investment cycle...
I'll answer both of these.
The investment cycle is not really taken off. You've concentrated only on the pro-poor and the farmer kind of...
Nobody has done more than I have in the last 2.5 years for the middle classes. I first raised the 2 lakh limit to 2.5 lakhs. Today it is effectively with that 2,500 rebate on tax, it's become, de facto it's become 3 lakhs. In fact, with the kind of tax planning which is involved, if you're earning 4.5 lakhs, you virtually end up paying little or no tax. So I've helped that class. Secondly, the advantage of this 5%, 10 becoming 5%, is also felt by the 5 to 10 lakhs and 10 lakhs and above. So this class is strengthened. Thirdly, your housing interest payments, again middle class problem. I increased it by 50,000 2 years ago. Your ATC deductions, I increased it straight by 50,000. So these are all different ways of helping and putting more money in the pocket of that middle class. You can save tax by saving under 80C. You can save tax even by investing in your children's education. That's a deduction. For your medical insurance. You can save tax by buying an apartment. Now, small issues that I've, the kind of incentive last year and this year I've given to affordable housing. Isn't that a middle class gesture? Today I have said 60 meters means carpet area, a small change, which effectively means that a 1,000 square feet apartment, which is a good 2-bedroom apartment if not more, now becomes affordable housing. It gets infrastructure status. So you get cheaper loans as far as those constructions are concerned. The kind of discounts I have given to the real estate sector, it helps them as far as staying in concern. Now let me tell you another factor. Last year I brought a change that all traders, shopkeepers, workshop owners with a turnover up to 2 crore rupees need not maintain any books of account. 8% of their turnover is presumed to be income. This year I have said if they pay by check or digital, or if they earn by that, then this 8 will become 6%. All professionals, lawyers, doctors earning up to 50 lakhs, and this will probably mean I have covered over 98% of that universe of professionals. Don't maintain books of accounts. Your gross turnover, 50% is presumed to be your expenditure. Just file a one-page return. I am told last year, 84 lakh assessees in this category have availed of this. Now, these are all administrative and taxation changes which go to the advantage of the middle class.
Okay,
itself.
so Finance Minister, you're saying this was not a conscious decision aimed at sending out any message to a constituency that perhaps your government now is trying to attract more aggressively, which is the marginalized, which is the poor. Because when you did read out the list of individuals, the groups of people that you wanted to address at the top of your budget, you didn't consciously pick out.
No, you see, I'll tell you, I gave that data in order to show that we are a hugely non-compliant society in terms of taxation. And therefore, the rich and the wealthy who buy cars, who travel abroad, are not necessarily paying taxes. Now, of course, as far as the poor are concerned, they are entitled to the first benefit. So when you say that I put more money in Manrega, that means in the informal sector which has been adversely impacted, I am trying to give them some sustenance. It's a carryover scheme of the previous government. I don't mind continuing it and strengthening it. So similarly, if I give you to the farmers a subsidized insurance scheme for their crop, or if I provide for their irrigation, or I provide for Awas, the housing in the rural areas. Now, these are all ways of helping the poor and the marginalized.
So you were not being consciously politically savvy. You were being pragmatic because their interests...
See, there has to be a social cause or a social commitment behind this exercise. If India is moving more towards a market economy, it must also have a social consciousness. That if you earn more from a liberalized economy, who gets the first right to that expenditure? Needless to say, it has to be in villages.
But many would say, Mr. Jaitley, that it is the suit boot ki sarkar jibe that Rahul Gandhi made that's virtually hurt you, and that's why you're doing this entire makeover for 2019.
I had at that stage used a phrase in Parliament saying, this is Sooj Booj ki sarkar. So by a liberalized economy, you have higher growth rates, higher revenue. So I have 17% growth in revenue per annum last 2 years. So I am earning more. What used to be a 8 lakh, 10 lakh crore budget is today a 21, 22 lakh budget. So we are earning more, we are spending more. And this greater spending, I think the first right has to come to the poor people. The mistake that the UPA made was, they didn't concentrate on increased productivity through a reform process and through aggressively handling the economy. They just redistributed the existing resources. I don't want to do that. I want to earn more. Only then I can help the poor more.
But you've also increased the allocations to Manrega at a historic high. Does that mean that the sort of salary benefit scheme that was being talked about is now a non-starter?
No, it's not. I think what the Chief Economic Advisor has laid as an agenda for the future is a brilliant idea. Subsidies are an amount which reach an untargeted sector of people. In fact, I had 2 years ago described subsidies in Parliament as an unquantified amount which reaches an unidentifiable section. When you travel by a train, you get subsidized. You are not entitled to a subsidy, but you get it. When I buy kerosene in Delhi, I get subsidized. When my child goes to a Delhi University college, he gets subsidized. Now, are the rich and the wealthy entitled to that subsidy? That's the basic question. Now, last year, therefore, Arvind Subramaniam had a brilliant chapter in the Economic Survey where he said, subsidies for the rich, should they not be phased out? Now, it was a thought process for the future that he was suggesting. That's what the Chief Economic Advisor is meant to be. He's an independent advisor. He has an arm's length distance from the government. He's supposed to tell us what futuristic policy should be. This year, he's put an idea on the table. Should all these subsidies being given by the center and the state not be clubbed together and converted into X percentage of families in India getting a minimum salary every month from the government? Now the amounts will tally. The only difficulty that I see, and I've discussed it at length with the Chief Economic Advisor, is Indian politics ready to substitute the present lot of subsidy regime
with new
with an alternative? I certainly feel the alternative is better, but the alternative cannot be in addition.
But can you build that?
Is your idea of bringing the universal basic income scheme something that you're going to keep for the 2019 elections ahead of that?
I don't think it's election linked. It is more linked to the fact that Indian politics has to mature in terms of deciding a rationalization, a better targeting, helping the people who need to be helped.
But that will happen once you start a dialogue with the opposition.
I think that's.
So when will that happen?
I think it's not a dialogue. It's an idea that Arvind has floated, and therefore I am glad various people are writing columns and commenting on it. Former finance ministers have commented on it, and so on. That's a part of a healthy dialogue itself, and therefore I think it needs to be debated in India whether this alternative is a better alternative. And hopefully, if wiser sense prevails one day, people may say, well, we think it's better.
When Mamata Banerjee actually comes out and calls your budget useless, pointless, schemeless, do you think you can have a dialogue with state leaders and regional satraps like that?
I don't get into personalities, but that's exactly what I am referring to. Because I don't think today Indian politics has that kind of maturity to immediately say this is better and therefore we must move to it. You'll probably take some time, and it may be a little longer than what we think it is, for this idea to sink in, for political parties to think this is a better alternative.
Okay, Mr. Jaitley, on the political funding, you've taken a first major step. You've decided to reduce the anonymous donations from the level of 20,000 to 2,000. Number one, you did it in an economic document like the budget, a political step like this. Did you think you didn't want to wait for an all-party consensus on this? Because that's something that every government has said and put it off.
You see, I'll tell you, this is a subject very close to my heart. And I've studied it, worked very closely on it. The Prime Minister has been publicly stating that he wants to clean up the political funding. When I was the Law Minister in Mr. Vajpayee's government, I had then pioneered amendments to the Companies Act and the Representation of People's Act and got the Finance Act amended by the Finance Ministry to provide for donations by check by individuals or partnerships or companies, donations to be treated as an expenditure in the hands of the donor and the parties being tax exempted. Now we found that some people started donating by check. Not too many. But we kept at it. When Pranab Babu was the finance minister, I was the opposition leader, I wrote to him that people are saying that because there is no anonymity and they fear consequences, therefore we must devise a scheme. And I had suggested a scheme which I am glad a very mature leader like him accepted. And in his budget he made a very remarkable change, where he said the company can donate money to a election trust, and that trust in turn will give it to a party. So the company's balance sheet will so donate it to a trust. So there was a pass-through created. That also hasn't helped so much. Today parties are getting donation by check, but it's a percentage. A very large part comes through cash donations, which you've been describing rightly so as anonymous donations. The Election Commission has called it anonymous donations.
Another way of referring to them is Benami.
Or Benami.
And people say that this step will not curb the Benami route.
No, it will. I'll tell you. So I have now suggested a scheme. And this scheme could fit in because it's a scheme really which requires a marginal amendment to the Companies Act, but essentially an amendment to the Income Tax Act. So it's a finance bill problem. Every party will get a tax exemption. The donor will get an expenditure deduction only if the following conditions exist. A, the donation is made by check. B, which I think is a real solution, the donation is made in a digital mode. Political parties should have a large structure. They must ask their body of donors to give smaller amounts, like President Obama did, and those donations must come through the digital mode. It's transparent, it's clean, there is no quid pro quo, because millions of people will give it to you. I have no doubt that if parties like the BJP, my own party, we start this campaign for a digital donation, we can get lakhs and lakhs of people.
Should you have started it earlier?
I think I've already discussed it with my party president. It's on his agenda.
Okay.
We are likely to do it.
Oh, you're likely to do it. That's an important news point.
3, we've accepted the Election Commission suggestion that this 20,000 and disclosure of the name of anybody who gives more than 20,000, this cash donation should be reduced to 2,000. This 2,000 is a figure suggested by the Election Commission, so we've accepted that suggestion. And 4, I must use this opportunity to explain this concept of an electoral bond. During the election periods, the government will notify a scheme by which there will be a notified bank, let us say the State Bank. The donor goes against payment by check, buys an electoral bond. It's limited in period of its life. That is, let us say, assume, I'm giving for illustration, within 30 days it has to be encashed.
Okay.
Every party will have a bank account which is prior notified to the Election Commission. This bond is only redeemable and encashable in that one account. Okay. So at the end of the election, a party will say, well, 500 people have given me election bonds.
Okay.
But
this is a
many political parties are already saying that instead of keeping the name anonymous for donors up to 20,000, people will begin to now have the same system for below 2,000, keeping them anonymous. So will it solve the problem?
If fake names are created, very serious consequences will be provided. And
what are those serious consequences? How will you find those out?
And I'll tell you, very simple. One of the consequences will be every party has to file its return. And if these conditions are violated, you lose your exemption.
But a lot of these
let me just clarify. You lose your exemption. Now, how do you establish that these are fake names in which this 2,000 or 20,000 has been received? Haven't we done it in the Janadhan accounts? Now, people who have made one deposit of 2 lakh rupees, we are not looking at them. But people who've made multiple deposits, we've identified thousands of them.
But parties like the Bahujan Samaj Party get 100% of their donations in these anonymous names.
Let's not get into any political party. If this is put as a condition of tax exemption, then if you get 100% of your donation only by cash exemptions, by faking names, then you'll lose your exemption. You'll have to pay 30% as tax. This will be treated as income in your hands. The consequences are going to be very severe. So I don't think, you see, let's be very clear. Why did we fix 2000 as a suggestion? Because the Election Commission said so. That's
True.
an expert body. Now, I don't want to get into a holier than thou politics that I am for zero, but Election Commission said so. It's a professional body, it's a competent body, it's a credible body. They've said so. I accept
Some
their
people have
suggestion.
just said, get out of the cash donation.
Well, I think 2,000 rupees is going to make it very difficult.
Okay.
In any case, we are a vibrant society. If there is misuse, you'll be visited with consequences. If there is greater misuse, probably the sense of public life or the outrage in public will compel people to further amend
What
the
about
law.
All of
the
this
BJP?
depends
When will
really
you
on
bring it in?
majority, doesn't it? It all depends on, as
No,
you
the
said,
finance
the
bill with
majority.
these amendments I have already introduced in Parliament.
BJP, when will the BJP shift completely to
Well,
taking...
I think the party president will decide, but I have already suggested to him that we will have a campaign for digital donations, and I think if a party like the BJP or even some very large, smaller parties or alternative national parties try it, their body of supporters would like to give it to them in the money in
The
check.
decision was taken in the context of a budget. Now, a number of political parties said that we could have been informed, we could have had an all-party meeting, a consensus could have been developed. Was this a particular reason for bringing it up in the budget without
See,
really any...
I'll tell you, Rahul, it's a finance bill amendment. Now, it is not as though the political system is unaware of the problem. Somebody had to take the lead and find a solution. And I can tell you, even my critics are conceding that this electoral bonds is an idea which will, at least both in the hands of the donor and the hands of the recipient, create clean money to administer India's politics. And the kind of consequences which visit us for disclosure of identity, and I'll tell you how disclosure of identity hurts. The moment you say identity, the identity of the donor is known because he may have bought, let's say, 10 crore worth of bonds.
Sure.
How he has distributed them is known only to him.
But left parties have raised another alternative, which is, state funding of elections and banning complete taking of corporate
Donations.
funding of elections to or political parties.
Let us be very clear. When this 2001 amendments also came, the left parties were the only ones which had opposed it. At that time, where I borrowed the idea from. The Congress party had set up an internal party committee headed by the then leader of opposition in the Rajya Sabha, Dr. Manmohan Singh. So Dr. Manmohan Singh had given this report. I went through the report and I thought it was a great idea. So I, as the law minister, incorporated it and then brought this amendment. So both the Congress and the BJP supported this and it was carried. The left parties opposed it. I think the problem with the left parties is they don't want to own up the fact as to who they get their donations from. After all, they also contest elections.
Can we just go back just a few more questions, because you raised the spectre of a universal basic income and the possibility of it being rolled out. Now, you said that there are certain prerogatives you have as finance minister when it came to cauterizing the donations in the poll funding, and that's why you brought it up in a budget. Could it be that tomorrow the finance minister will get up in the last budget really and say that we are going to go ahead with the UBI?
See, I'll tell you, as I have said, that is a substitution of the existing system of subsidies. What is being done by various state governments will also be involved. It's more like the GST. And unless you have some kind of federal cooperation in this, to implement such a huge reform may not be so easily possible. And therefore, I think it needs to be discussed. Every aspect needs to be debated. And once people are convinced of it, I think it will be an idea whose time will come at that time.
Mr. Jaitley, Rahul Gandhi, when he came out of Parliament immediately after the budget, made one comment, and that's the only official comment on the budget that he's really made. He said that this budget has done nothing for farmers and nothing for job creation.
I don't think he read the budget, or he was following what I was saying. Because this budget, as my last budget also was, has a huge expenditure on the rural sector, for farmers, much more than what the UPA themselves had. This budget has the highest ever expenditure for infrastructure. This budget has many firsts in itself. And therefore, I think he probably should go into the details of what we've done in the budget, and only then will the comment really have some value.
Mr. Chidambaram, holding a press conference today, said that the reason why the Congress feels this way, and perhaps why the Congress Vice President came out with this statement, was because there were no references to MSP or any other pointed...
MSP is not provided for in the budget.
Okay. So this is the
and he
statement
there were
that he made.
tax cuts that have been made. Chidambaram's word,
I wish
pitiful tax cuts.
where every budget of the UPA increased taxes. This is one budget which has reduced taxes. I haven't increased indirect taxes, and I have reduced direct taxes almost for everyone.
What do you say to those people who said that before the election, the Prime Minister had guaranteed or promised jobs by 2022?
Well, if
number.
the economy picks up and economic activity picks up, jobs get created in the process. Jobs is not a separate compartment which is dealing from the economy itself. So jobs are a result of the economic activity that the economic policy generates. And as far as this government is concerned, we've left nothing in terms of economic policy that could have been undertaken. Compare it with the paralysis era that we went through. So those who were responsible for the paralysis era have now turned into commentators and columnists against us. But I wish they compared their own period of inactivity.
So are you saying that the number that was set, the 100 million job mark, that we're not going to meet?
Well, I am not saying so, but jobs are being created in the process of the economy. After all, once you have such large infrastructure, doesn't it create jobs? Once Mudra loans worth 2,24,000 crores is going to be given, isn't it going to lead to self-employment? Once you have a record allocation in the informal sector for Manrega, isn't work going to be created by that? Obviously, each one of these activities is creating jobs. When you have new townships coming up, don't they create jobs?
Mr. Jaitley, many would also ask the question that when it comes to the Election Commission and the constraints that the Election Commission had put on you, did it weigh on your mind when you were reading your budget?
Least, I think the Election Commission put one condition, which was a correct condition, that since elections in 5 state assemblies are on, no state-specific scheme should be announced, and we took care that anything which influences the elections, we don't do that.
But the mention of scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, minorities and all
Which
of that...
Which budget doesn't have a mention of that? Every budget has to have a mention. You need to say how much is provided in the sub-plans or allocated for the vulnerable sections. It's always mentioned in the budget. That's a part of a normal budget speech.
And Mr. Jaitley, are you worried at all about the protectionism that's growing in the world, the H-1B visa regime in Trump?
We are worried.
What is our strategy towards that?
Well, I think we have to wait and see for some time as to what is happening. India doesn't control the domestic politics of another country. That's a sovereign state, a very large, important state. I had only hoped that trade helps. Trade adds to jobs. Trade adds to economy. Protectionism doesn't.
So you're saying that this will hurt the US economy?
For the very simple reason that if you impose a tax on products coming from one country, then the American consumer is going to pay. If you say outsourcing is bad, then you have costlier labor in the US. So the American companies will have to pay more. If you say the more efficient companies can't function, or you can't get the best professionals from across the world into the US. Today the United States is what it is because it attracts the best talent in the world. Now if you debar that talent, certainly it's not going to be very helpful to the economy in that country. And I am sure at some stage this debate within the United States itself will start.
But what is India's reaction likely to be? Do you think it's going to have an impact on Indians working in the United States?
Well, obviously if you cut down the number of visas, it is going to have an adverse impact on our jobs, and it's an issue of our concern. And I'm sure those in the government who handle our policy in this regard are seized of the matter.
And do you think that the Prime Minister will raise this issue? Because
Well, I
Mamata
can't
Banerjee
really
today
say.
has
It's
come
not-
out and said that the government must fight for these jobs and must
Well,
fight for the IT sector.
I don't think these matters are stated in the course of a television interview, nor does a satyagraha offered by an Indian Chief Minister resolve this problem. This has to be handled at a far more mature level.
Mr. Jaitley, once again I bring you back to the question. A pro-people, a pro-farmer budget is what you came up. Still, you stayed away from populism because you stuck pretty much to your fiscal consolidation path as well, deviating just a little bit, which has been criticized by Mr. Chidambaram but not by many economists.
I think what is important in India is A, our track record at fiscal consolidation. B, more important than fiscal deficit, what is important is the quality of fiscal deficit. And let me explain why. UPA took the fiscal deficit to 5.7% where it should have been 3%. They left behind a declared fiscal deficit of 4.6% just 2.5 years ago. And we are now being given sermons on fiscal deficit. This 4.6%, if you looked at the quality of that fiscal deficit, the tax refunds which were held back, the payments which were held over to the next year, the quality of fiscal deficit was indeed inadequate. And what is worse, that those red lines, which are the phrase I repeatedly hear, were all achieved not by collecting more taxes and spending more, but by making cuts at the end of every year. So the UPA in its last few years cut 1 lakh crores, 80,000 crores, 1 lakh 20,000 crores. So the quality of the fiscal deficit was very, very poor that the UPA maintained. They didn't meet the targets, and when they tried to meet the targets, they would just cut down expenditure, which hurts growth. So the UPA had a terrible record on fiscal deficit. But to say that by cutting down expenditure, or by carrying over the refunds to the next year, I maintain the fiscal deficit. So let me just please complete, because a lot has been said on this. The NDA government, in our 2 full years, the current year and last year, we haven't carried forward the refunds. We haven't followed that. We've not cut a single rupee. In fact, in both the years, our revised estimates are higher than our budget estimates. So let alone cutting 80,000 and 1 lakh crores, we've spent that kind of money extra. And that's how public investment has led to growth. So and this 4.6%, in a period of 3 years, I bring it down to 3.2. I then will bring it down next year to 3. The FRBM committee has suggested a pause and thereafter move towards 2.8 and 2.5, etc. I'm going to meet that target. So we have an excellent record on fiscal consolidation. UPA had the worst record on fiscal consolidation. I don't want to follow the UPA path on fiscal consolidation.
Going forward, Finance Minister, where do you see the challenges? Because the survey outlined a couple of challenges.
Well, I see 2 important challenges, both of which are linked to each other. One is the banks.
The NPAs at 6 lakh crores.
And these are not NPAs for loans which have now been given. So this sermon which is being given to us, or the NPAs have increased, because during your regime, during the UPA, particularly during that boom period, the kind of advances and loans which were given, and given to who all, were such that some of those sectors are doing very badly, and therefore those companies are stressed. All that has happened during the NDA government is that the interest keeps piling up. So it's increased during our regime for 2 reasons. The asset quality review has discovered the real NPAs, not what was being hidden below the carpet. So it's more transparent. And B, the interest has added up to what was done during that period. So it's a legacy issue. I think we need to bring the banks back to stream, and this is extremely important. And then once this entire investment we are making in infrastructure, into the agricultural sector, etc., the kind of FDI we are getting in India and the way we are moving ahead, the GST, hopefully it will spur private investment. So I think between banks and private investment, these are the two important challenges that we have.
In 2008, the UPA government came up with the farm loan waiver scheme and bought themselves another election and got victory in the 2009 elections. Is the universal basic income scheme going to be your ticket to 2019?
Well, I think I've already answered adequately as to what are the circumstances of the UBI itself. And I think it's an idea just given, so let us see how it phases itself out in the future.
Chidambaram also says that there exist laws to bring to confiscate assets of the absconders. We at times now call it the Vijay Mallya defaulter law. But he says such laws already exist. What is the government's plan in bringing a new law?
Well, I think this whole business of attaching assets, finding out these assets, this is too scattered an area of jurisprudence. And therefore, the inadequacy of those laws is being examined. I already have an informal group which is working on this. And very shortly, we will streamline the kind of... Therefore, the phrase I used in my speech are legislative changes. Mm-hmm. Now, these legislative changes may also imply strengthening the existing system that we have.
Okay. Mr. Jaitley, as far as the growth issue is concerned, estimates are out there. Some say the growth estimates have fallen from 7.6 to 7.1. The IMF says it's down to 6.6. Where do you peg the growth numbers, and are you worried about the growth post-demo?
I don't get into this. You see, even without the demonetization, compared to the 7.6% last year, because of global economy and various factors, there was some dip which was likely, and that's why the CSO has indicated that pre-demonetization 7.2 to be the more likely figure. Now, Chief Economic Advisor's own estimation is that over and above what would have otherwise happened if it was business as usual, it could have 0.25% or 0.5% impact. I am quite willing to absorb that impact for the reason that when we took the decision for demonetization, we knew that for a quarter or two, there'll be a hit. But beyond that, the advantages are far too many. Now, please go around, and I'm not only on anecdotal evidence. How is it that immediately this year the personal income tax is rising 38%? Have the incomes gone up, or are the declarations increasing? Obviously, the declarations are increasing. Now, obviously, when with more money into the banking system, banks' capacity to lend, that's part of my problem, is going to improve. The rates are going to come down, which have shown some evidence of their coming down. More indirect taxes, more direct taxes. And I think what's most important is India is changing ethically for the better. Today, for the first time in history, you have a budget where the discussion is, should there be clean political money? Should businesses come out clean? Should individuals be coming out clean? Should payments be in the digital form or the check form rather than in the cash form? Cash is becoming a bad word. And therefore, the idea of going in, look at the huge impact it's making on our lives, in the way we live, the way we spend, the way people are eating in restaurants, the way people are booking their tickets. Railway tickets, 68% are being booked online now. That's a huge change, and the railway passenger is not the affluent one. And I think this is a big change which is going to take place.
Well, one measure of change, of course, is the confidence people have in that change. And we have a UP election coming up. You have a Punjab election, 3 other states. If they go adversely for this government, do you believe it will be a mandate against Notbandi? Because the Prime Minister's campaign...
I don't think we are going to go adversely.
That.
Therefore, I'm not going to get into any hypothetical situation. I think we are going to win most of these states. Your polls show that. And independent of the polls, every poll which has taken place, whether it gives us a victory or not, when you ask a question, do you support demonetization? This whole body of people who stood in queues, 75% say yes.
So it's delinked from electoral success.
It's dealing
or
from
failure.
electoral politics. I think this decision has an ethical premium attached to it. For the first time, India feels, here you have a prime minister. When history of this period is written, let's say 20 years down, is he impacting a change socially in the way we live? Which prime minister has said that every house needs a toilet? Which prime minister has said that let us change the adverse sex ratio in Haryana? You see, you are undertaking programs to take programs of this kind. You are going beyond politics. Which prime minister has said that I will clean up the political funding of India? Which prime minister has said that in terms of economy, businesses and individuals must change the way they spend, change the way they earn. Labor must also be paid by check, irrespective of the consequences. Now, here you are having in almost every field of life changes being suggested. And who can fault some of these changes?
Well, the opposition does. And Rahul Gandhi has said it's an atomic bomb on the people.
Well, I think they haven't really understood the import and the consequences of 2016-17 is too late in the day to say cash is a preferred option.
But what's your response to those who say the Uttar Pradesh elections will be a referendum on the demonetization decision?
Well, every election is a referendum. No election is a referendum. For television channels, every election is a semi-final. India has never seen a final till date. So I think these are media headlines.
But it is a critical election.
It's a critical election, and be assured, if you make it as a election on demonetization, then we'll probably get over 70% votes, which is not so likely.
The Prime Minister has made it an election about demonetization.
No, I think demonetization will certainly be one of the issues in the election. So will be several other issues. In Uttar Pradesh, bad governance, the kind of gangsters who've been given ticket by the Samajwadi Party, the campaign of the Congress Party to say ki 27 saal or bura hal, and suddenly you go and embrace that man. And then say we now see virtues in align with those who did horrible things in UP. I think all these are going to be issues.
Mr. Jaitley, how do you look forward to your next next budget? Because that's going to be the penultimate budget ahead of the elections of 2019.
I can tell you, I have some very clear objectives. Growth must pick up. Rural areas and agriculture will always get preference. Infrastructure will always get preference. And I want to strengthen the neo-middle class.
The one that you've given a tax break to this.
Well, that's strengthening the neo-middle class, and I think we have to expand.
And corporates who were expecting tax cuts?
Well, let me just clarify. I saw an adverse comment yesterday when you said, well, reduce corporate tax for everybody. 96% of the companies with a turnover up to 50 crores are all paying 30% plus because of the surcharge.
Sure.
The top 4% use the exemptions are in any case paying 25%. So what is this argument that those who are paying 25% give them a tax rebate first? Well, I have kept my tax rebate to those who are paying 30% and are the real job creators. Go to any industrial area in India and you'll find these are the real backbone of the Indian economy.
So no more exemptions for suit boot?
No, I am not saying that. There's no budget is ever the last budget. But I am just responding to this comment that you should have given it to the big boys today. But the big boys in any case are not paying 30%. If you take their net average, I have said so in my budget speech, they are in any case paying 25%.
Mr. Jaitley, does the line and the tag of Soot Boot Ki Sarkar somewhere worry the BJP, which is why you've virtually tried to do a makeover in this budget?
I don't think anybody took that comment seriously. It's good enough for a college level debate. It's not good enough for a serious politics. Everybody knows that those who've come up the feudal way of life and benefited on the strength of dynasties are now talking in terms of simplicity and Aam Aadmi. And those who've struggled all their lives and come up on their own merit should be considered the elite. I don't think this argument really weighs in any substance.
Well, we leave it at that. Thank you very much, Finance Minister.
Thank you.
Thank you
for
very
speaking
much
to
for
Times
joining
Now.
us and giving us your time.